The first time I saw my daughter's new face, I was standing in the checkout line at Whole Foods, holding a basket full of ingredients for the Sunday dinner she wouldn't be coming to. There she was on the cover of some glossy magazine, lips plump to twice their natural size, cheekbones carved sharp as broken glass, eyes stretched wide in a way that made her look like a stranger wearing my child's smile. The headline read, "Wellness Guru Reveals Her $200,000 Beauty Transformation." $200,000. The exact amount I'd given her charity 6 months earlier from my husband's life insurance policy. But before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps give me the strength to speak my truth. Now let's get into my story. My name is Dorothy Mae Washington, and I raised a family of snakes. Not literally, you understand, though sometimes I wonder if actual serpents might have shown more gratitude than the children I spent 40 years loving, nurturing, and sacrificing for. At 68 years old, after burying my husband of 42 years and thinking I'd finally earned some peace, I discovered that the daughter I'd entrusted with $250,000 had been playing me for the biggest fool in Atlanta. Let me paint you a picture of how this all started, because the devil is always in the details, and honey, there were enough details to populate hell itself. It was a Thursday in March when Marcus passed. One of those Atlanta spring days where the dogwoods are blooming pink and white like God's own confetti, and you can smell hope in the air. I was in the kitchen making his favorite cornbread when I heard the thud from upstairs. By the time I got to him, my Marcus was already gone, sprawled across our bedroom floor like a man who'd simply decided to lie down and dream forever. Heart attack, the doctors said. Quick and painless. As if there's anything painless about watching the love of your life turn cold in your arms while you're still wearing the apron he bought you for your 35th wedding anniversary. The one with "Kiss the Cook" embroidered in red thread that's now faded to pink. The funeral was everything Marcus would have hated. Too much fuss, too many flowers, too many people crying over a man who preferred his emotions served straight, no chaser. But our 3 children insisted on making it a production. Denise, my oldest at 45, flew in from Los Angeles with her new age healing crystals and organic everything, talking about celebrating Daddy's transition to the astral plane. Michael Jr., my middle child, came up from Miami with his 3rd wife. Or was it the 4th? I'd stopped keeping track after the 2nd divorce cost me my retirement fund helping him with lawyer fees. And Kimberly, my baby at 39, drove down from Charlotte with her husband Derek and their 2 teenagers who were too busy staring at their phones to acknowledge their grandmother's grief. They were all very concerned about my finances, you see. Very worried about how poor old mama was going to manage on her own. Never mind that I'd been managing the household budget since before they were born, or that I'd kept food on the table during the lean years when Marcus was building his construction business from nothing but sweat and stubbornness. "Mama, you can't stay in this big house all by yourself," Kimberly kept saying, her voice dripping with what she probably thought was compassion but sounded more like calculation to my ears. "It's not safe. And think about the expenses, utilities, maintenance, property taxes." Denise nodded along, her meditation beads clicking against her organic hemp purse. "The universe is telling you it's time to simplify, Mama. Let go of material attachments. Downsize to something more manageable." Michael Jr. was more direct as always. "This house is sitting on prime real estate, Ma. You could sell it, move into one of those nice senior communities, and have plenty left over to enjoy your golden years." Golden years. As if years could be golden when you're spending them alone, rattling around in rooms full of memories while your children circle like vultures waiting for their inheritance. But I listened to them because that's what mothers do. We listen to our children even when their words cut deeper than any strangers ever could. And when they presented their solution, their grand plan for taking care of poor, helpless Mama, I wanted so desperately to believe that it came from love rather than greed. The plan was beautiful in its simplicity. Denise had been running a nonprofit called Healing Hearts Foundation out of Los Angeles for the past 3 years. On paper, it was everything you'd want in a charity, providing mental health services to underserved communities, supporting grief counseling programs, helping families navigate loss and trauma. She had brochures with smiling faces and testimonials that would make you weep, talking about lives transformed and hope restored. "Think about it, Mama," she said, sitting in my kitchen at the same table where I'd helped her with homework 30 years earlier. Daddy's death could mean something. His legacy could live on through helping other families going through what we're going through. She was good, I'll give her that. She knew exactly which heartstrings to pluck. She talked about naming a grief counseling program after Marcus, about helping other widows navigate the maze of paperwork and loneliness that comes with losing a spouse. She painted pictures with her words, pictures of my husband's memory living on in acts of service, of turning our private pain into public healing. And the best part? I wouldn't have to worry about managing a large sum of money in my emotional state. The foundation would handle everything. All I had to do was sign the check, and Denise would make sure every penny went to helping people who needed it most. The life insurance payout was $250,000. Not a fortune by today's standards, but enough to keep me comfortable in my old age, or to buy the beach house in Savannah that Marcus and I had always talked about. Enough to travel, to spoil my grandchildren, to finally take those art classes I'd been putting off for 40 years. But when Denise looked at me with those same brown eyes that used to beg for bedtime stories and one more cookie, when she talked about honoring her daddy's memory and making a difference in the world, I felt that familiar tug in my chest. The same feeling that had made me give up my teaching career to raise my babies, that had made me take out loans for their college educations while wearing the same winter coat for 15 years. I signed the check for $200,000 on a Tuesday afternoon in April, keeping $50,000 for myself. Just enough, I thought, to maintain some independence while still being the generous, loving mother they expected me to be. Denise cried when I handed it to her, actual tears streaming down her face as she promised that every dollar would honor her father's memory. "You're an angel, Mama," she whispered, hugging me tight in my driveway as she prepared to drive back to the airport. "Daddy would be so proud. This is going to change so many lives." I watched her car disappear around the corner, feeling that warm glow that comes from doing something meaningful, something that matters. For the first time since Marcus's death, I felt like I had a purpose again. Not just as a grieving widow, but as someone who could make a difference in the world. The first few months were everything I'd hoped for. Denise would call every week with updates about the foundation's work. She'd tell me about support groups starting up, about therapists being hired, about families getting the help they desperately needed. She sent me photos of the memorial garden they were planning in Marcus's honor, complete with a bronze plaque that would bear his name and the dates that bookend his beautiful life. I started volunteering at the local senior center, sharing my story with other widows, encouraging them to find meaning in their loss. I even gave a little speech at the monthly grief support meeting about turning pain into purpose, about how my husband's memory was living on through the work being done in California. Sometimes God closes one door to open another. I told a room full of women who understood the weight of an empty house and a too quiet kitchen. Our loved ones' legacies don't have to end with their last breath. I believed every word I said. I believed in my daughter's mission, in the good work being done in Marcus's name. I believed that my sacrifice meant something. Then came that Thursday in October, standing in the Whole Foods checkout line with my reading glasses perched on my nose, looking at my daughter's surgically altered face staring back at me from that magazine cover. The woman behind the register was chatting about the article as she scanned my groceries. "Can you believe she spent $200,000 on her face?" she was saying to her coworker. "These Instagram influencers are something else." Says here she's some kind of wellness expert. But apparently wellness means looking like a completely different person. My hands started shaking as I reached for my wallet. $200,000. The exact amount I'd donated to Healing Hearts Foundation 6 months earlier. The same amount Denise had promised would go to grief counseling and support services for families like ours. I bought that magazine, stood right there in the grocery store parking lot, and read every single word of that interview, my heart breaking a little more with each paragraph. There was my daughter talking about her spiritual journey and her commitment to authenticity, all while sitting in what looked like a Beverly Hills plastic surgeon's office with a face that cost more than most people make in 5 years. She talked about her business. And it was a business, not a charity. Some kind of online wellness coaching service where she sold meditation courses and healing crystals to desperate people looking for answers. No mention of grief counseling. No mention of support groups or mental health services. No mention of her father or the foundation that was supposedly helping families in need. The memorial garden? The bronze plaque? The therapists and support programs? All lies. pretty as the face she'd bought with my husband's life insurance money. I sat in my car for an hour reading and rereading that interview, trying to understand how I'd been so completely thoroughly fooled. The daughter I'd raised to value honesty and integrity had stolen from me as surely as if she'd broken into my house and emptied my jewelry box. But the worst part wasn't even the money, though Lord knows $200,000 is nothing to sneeze at. The worst part was that she'd used my love for Marcus against me. She'd taken my grief, my desire to honor his memory, and turned it into a weapon to cut my heart clean out of my chest. When I finally drove home that evening, I tried calling her. The phone rang once, then went straight to voicemail. That chirpy, fake positive voice telling me to manifest my best life and leave a message after the tone. I left 3 messages. Polite ones at first, asking her to call me back saying we needed to talk about the foundation. Then more urgent ones, my voice shaking with hurt and confusion. Finally, one last message where I could barely speak through my tears, begging her to explain, to help me understand how the daughter I'd loved and trusted could do this to me. She never called back. Instead, 2 days later, I discovered that my number had been blocked. When I tried calling from the landline, the same thing happened. When I attempted to reach out through social media, I found that I'd been blocked there too. My daughter, the child I'd carried for 9 months, nursed through countless sleepless nights, cheered for at school plays and graduation ceremonies, had erased me from her life as easily as deleting a text message. That's when I realized that grief isn't just about losing the people we love to death. Sometimes the people we love choose to die to us while they're still walking around, breathing, spending our money on their surgically enhanced faces and blocking our numbers when the truth comes calling. But here's what my children didn't know about their dear old mama. 42 years of marriage to Marcus Washington had taught me a thing or two about patience, strategy, and the long game. My husband didn't build his construction business by being loud and demanding. He built it by being thorough, methodical, and absolutely relentless when someone tried to cheat him. As I sat in my empty kitchen that night, staring at the magazine photo of my daughter's new face, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt was still there, raw and bleeding like an open wound. But underneath it, something else was growing. Something quiet and cold and absolutely determined. They thought they were dealing with a grieving old woman, confused and helpless without her husband to guide her. They thought I'd go quietly into whatever corner they'd planned for me, grateful for whatever scraps of attention they threw my way. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. Because Dorothy Mae Washington didn't raise no fools, but apparently she'd raised some thieves. And if there's one thing I learned from 42 years of loving Marcus Washington, it's that thieves, no matter how pretty their faces or how sweet their lies, always get what's coming to them. The only question was how long I was willing to wait, and how carefully I was willing to plan. As it turned out, I had nothing but time, and 40 years of motherhood had made me very, very good at planning indeed. The next morning, I did what I always do when the world feels like it's spinning off its axis. I made biscuits from scratch. Not the kind that pop out of a tube with a satisfying thunk, but the real ones that require you to cut cold butter into flour with your bare hands until it looks like coarse meal. The kind that demand patience and precision, the kind Marcus used to say could cure heartbreak and heal hurt feelings. As I worked the dough, pressing and folding with the heel of my palm, I let my mind work too. 40 years of marriage teaches you that the best decisions aren't made in the heat of anger, but in the cool light of dawn when you can think clearly and plan properly. I'd spent the night alternating between rage and heartbreak, but this morning brought something else entirely: clarity. The kind of sharp, crystalline clarity that comes when you finally see people for exactly who they are instead of who you hoped they might be. My children had made a mistake. Not just the stealing, though Lord knows that was bad enough, but the bigger mistake of underestimating their mother. They'd seen my grief and assumed it made me weak. They'd seen my generosity and mistaken it for foolishness. Most importantly, they'd forgotten that the woman who'd raised them to be smart, successful adults hadn't lost her own intelligence when she signed that insurance check. While the biscuits baked, filling my kitchen with the smell of comfort and home, I made myself a pot of coffee and sat down at Marcus's old desk in his study. He'd always kept meticulous records. Every receipt, every contract, every piece of correspondence filed away in perfect order. Paper trail tells the whole story. He used to say, "You want to know the truth about somebody, follow the money." Well, it was time to follow the money. I started with Denise's nonprofit registration. Healing Hearts Foundation was indeed a registered charity in California, but a little digging revealed some interesting details. It had been established exactly 3 months before Marcus died, and Denise was listed as the sole board member, president, and treasurer. The charity's stated mission was deliberately vague, providing emotional and spiritual support services to individuals and families in transition. The foundation's tax filings were public record, and what I found there made my coffee taste bitter in my mouth. In its first year of operation, Healing Hearts Foundation had received exactly one major donation. Mine. The $200,000 I'd given them represented 98% of their total revenue. The remaining 2% came from what looked like Denise's own pocket, probably just enough to make the paperwork look legitimate. But here's where it got interesting. The foundation's expenses told a story that would have made Marcus proud of his detective work. Office rent, $8,000 per month for a Beverly Hills address. Administrative salary, $180,000 annually, paid to 1D Washington Chen. Denise had hyphenated her name after her second marriage. Professional services, $45,000, paid to something called Ethereal Wellness Consulting, which, according to my internet research, was Denise's own for-profit business. Not one penny had gone to grief counseling. Not 1 cent to support groups or mental health services. My donation had been nothing more than an elaborate money laundering scheme, funneling cash from my husband's life insurance policy directly into my daughter's pocket. The memorial garden? The bronze plaque? Pure fiction, designed to tug at a grieving mother's heartstrings. I printed everything out, creating a file that would have made any attorney proud. Then I started making phone calls. The first call was to my lawyer, James Patterson, who'd handled Marcus's estate. James had known our family for 20 years, had watched my children grow up, had even given Denise legal advice when she was setting up her various business ventures. "Dorothy," he said when I explained the situation, his voice heavy with disappointment. "I'm so sorry. This is fraud, plain and simple. Wire fraud, mail fraud, potentially tax fraud too if she's claiming charitable deductions for personal expenses. What are my options?" I asked, though I already suspected what he was going to say. "Criminal charges, certainly. The amounts involved make this a felony. Civil suit to recover the funds. We could freeze her assets, force her to liquidate that wellness business to pay you back." He paused and I could hear papers rustling. "But Dorothy, you should know that legal proceedings like this, they take time. And they're not private. This would be public record." Public record. My family's dirty laundry aired for all of Atlanta to see. My daughter's mugshot in the newspaper. My grandchildren finding out their mother was a thief through courthouse gossip. "Let me think about it," I told James, though my mind was already working on a different angle entirely. The second call was to my accountant, Patricia Wells. Patricia had been doing my taxes for 15 years, and she'd always been straight with me about money matters. She was also, as it happened, the treasurer for several legitimate charities around Atlanta. "Patricia," I said after explaining the situation, "hypothetically speaking, if someone wanted to expose a fraudulent charity without necessarily involving the police, what options might they have?" Patricia was quiet for a long moment. "Well," she said slowly, "the IRS takes charity fraud very seriously. They have a whole division dedicated to investigating tax-exempt organizations. And the California Attorney General's office has a charitable trusts division that monitors nonprofits. They can revoke tax-exempt status, impose fines, shut down operations. How would someone report something like that? Anonymous tip line. Online reporting form. They investigate everything, especially when there's documentation." Another pause. "Dorothy, if you're thinking of going that route, you should know that IRS investigations are thorough. They dig into everything: personal finances, business records, tax returns going back years. And if they find criminal activity, they don't hesitate to refer cases to federal prosecutors." Federal prosecutors. The kind who don't care about your feelings or your family dynamics. The kind who see fraud as fraud, period. I thanked Patricia and hung up, then sat in Marcus's chair for a long while, staring out the window at the garden we'd planted together 30 years ago. The roses were blooming late this year. Deep red blooms that reminded me of the color of Marcus's favorite tie. The one he wore to church every Sunday for 20 years until it finally frayed beyond repair. Marcus had been a fair man, But he'd also been a firm one. Actions have consequences. He used to tell our children when they messed up. You can't learn from mistakes if you don't face the music. Well, it was time for Denise to face the music. But first, I needed to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with. One fraudulent charity was bad enough, but something told me there was more to this story. I spent the rest of the morning researching my daughter's various business ventures. Ethereal wellness consulting was just the tip of the iceberg. Over the past 5 years, Denise had launched and abandoned a series of enterprises: a crystal healing workshop, an online meditation course, a spiritual life coaching certification program, and something called the Divine Feminine Empowerment Retreat that charged women $5,000 for a weekend in Malibu to reconnect with their goddess energy. Each business had its own website, its own social media presence, its own testimonials from satisfied customers. But when I dug deeper, a pattern emerged. The testimonials were recycled from business to business, just with different names attached. The retreat center in Malibu was actually a rented Airbnb. The certified spiritual advisors were unlicensed life coaches with online certificates from dubious institutions. My daughter wasn't just a thief. She was running what amounted to a spiritual con game, targeting vulnerable women going through difficult transitions in their lives. Women like me. The irony wasn't lost on me. Denise had built her entire business model around exploiting people's pain and their desire for healing. She'd identified a market: women dealing with loss, divorce, empty nest syndrome, midlife crises, and created a series of expensive solutions that promised transformation but delivered nothing but lighter bank accounts. And she'd perfected her technique on her own mother. By noon, I had a different plan forming. James Patterson could wait. The police could wait. The IRS, well, they'd get their turn. But first, I was going to do something that would hurt Denise far more than any legal proceeding ever could. I was going to destroy her reputation. You see, Denise's entire business depended on one thing: trust. Women had to believe that she was authentic, genuine, someone who'd walked the path of healing herself and could guide others through their own journeys. Her social media presence was carefully curated to project an image of serenity, wisdom, and spiritual enlightenment. She posted daily affirmations, photos of herself meditating at sunrise, inspirational quotes over sunset backgrounds. But what would happen if her followers learned that this enlightened spiritual guide had stolen $200,000 from her own grieving mother? What would happen if they discovered that her nonprofit foundation was nothing more than an elaborate tax dodge? What would happen if they found out that the woman teaching them about authentic living was living the most inauthentic life imaginable? I opened up my laptop and started typing. Not an angry rant or an emotional plea, but a simple factual account of what had happened. I included screenshots of the charity filings, copies of the magazine article about her plastic surgery, documentation of her business expenses. I wrote it the way Marcus would have written a construction contract: clear, precise, and absolutely unassailable. But I didn't post it immediately. Instead, I saved it as a draft and moved on to phase 2 of my plan. I started following my daughter's social media accounts, not from my own profile — she blocked me, after all — but from a new account I created under the name Concerned Citizen. I joined the Facebook groups where she promoted her services. I signed up for her email newsletter. I even paid for access to one of her online courses, using a prepaid credit card and a fake name. What I found there made my blood boil all over again. She was charging women $500 for grief recovery coaching sessions, where she promised to help them transform their pain into power. She was selling $50 meditation recordings to widows, promising they could reconnect with their deceased loved ones through spiritual communication. She was making money off other people's grief, the same grief she'd exploited in me. But here's what Denise didn't know. Her mother had spent 40 years volunteering for church committees, organizing charity events, and building relationships with people throughout Atlanta's faith community. I knew pastors and social workers, grief counselors, and community organizers. I knew the real professionals who did legitimate work with grieving families, and they were going to be very interested in what I had to tell them. Over the next week, I made calls. Not angry, vengeful calls, but concerned, informational ones. I reached out to directors of hospice programs, leaders of bereavement support groups, licensed therapists who worked with grieving families. I shared my research, not as an angry mother, but as a community member concerned about vulnerable people being taken advantage of. I just thought you should know, I would say. There's someone out there targeting your clients, promising services she can't deliver. I'd hate for families who are already suffering to lose money on top of everything else. The response was immediate and fierce. Legitimate grief counselors don't appreciate con artists moving in on their territory, especially when those con artists are stealing money from the exact people they dedicated their lives to helping. Within 3 days, I had offers from 5 different attorneys who specialized in charitable fraud, all of whom were willing to work pro bono. I had contacts at 3 different investigative journalism outlets, all interested in the story of spiritual scammers preying on grieving families. I had promises from grief counseling organizations across the country to share warnings about Denise's services with their client networks. But the best part was yet to come. You see, Denise's business model depended on her ability to present herself as someone who'd overcome tremendous personal challenges through spiritual growth. Her origin story, repeated across all her marketing materials, was about learning to heal from family trauma and generational wounds after the death of her beloved father. She'd built her entire brand on Marcus's death. She was monetizing her fake grief just like she'd monetized mine. That's when I decided it was time to tell the world about the real Denise Washington. Not through angry accusations or tearful confrontations, but through the most powerful weapon I had, the truth. I spent that weekend crafting my response. Not just the blog post I'd already written, but a comprehensive exposé that told the whole story. I documented everything: the fake charity, the fraudulent tax filings, the recycled testimonials, the expensive plastic surgery paid for with charitable donations. But I also told my own story. The story of a mother who trusted her daughter with the most precious thing she had, her husband's memory, only to watch that trust get carved up and injected into a face she no longer recognized. I wrote about the real cost of grief, not just the emotional cost but the financial one. How scammers target the vulnerable, how they use love and loss as weapons, how they turn family bonds into profit margins. And I wrote about Marcus, the real Marcus, not the fictional Saint Denise had created for her marketing materials. I wrote about a man who'd built his business on honesty, who taught his children that integrity wasn't negotiable, who would have been horrified to know his death was being used to fund his daughter's vanity and greed. By Sunday evening I had everything ready. The blog post, the supporting documents, the contact list of every journalist, attorney, and grief counselor I'd spoken with. All I needed was the right moment to push the button and watch Denise's carefully constructed world come crashing down. That moment came Monday morning, when I checked Denise's Instagram and saw her latest post. It was a photo of her in her meditation garden, the one that looked suspiciously like the Beverly Hills plastic surgeon's waiting room, with a caption that made my hands shake with rage. Grateful today for my angel father, whose love continues to guide me in helping others heal from loss. His spirit lives on through the work I do, and I know he's proud of the lives we're touching through Healing Hearts Foundation. Sometimes our greatest gifts come through our greatest pain. #blessed, #grief healing, #dad's memory, #healing hearts. 1,700 likes. 300 comments from women thanking her for her inspiration and her strength. Women just like me, trusting her with their broken hearts and their hard-earned money. I screenshot that post and added it to my file. Then I opened my laptop, took a deep breath, and hit publish on every platform I could find. The real healing was about to begin. The internet, I discovered, is a beautiful thing when you're on the right side of the truth. Within 6 hours of posting my exposé, The Real Cost of Fake Healing, a mother's story, the responses started pouring in. Not angry comments or dismissive reactions, but something far more powerful: recognition. Other people sharing their own stories of being scammed by spiritual healers, grief counselors, and wellness gurus who promised transformation but delivered only empty bank accounts. The first major breakthrough came from a woman named Sarah Martinez in Phoenix. She'd paid Denise $3,000 for a grief transformation intensive after losing her teenage son in a car accident. The promised personalized healing journey turned out to be a generic meditation script and a crystal pendant that Sarah later discovered cost $12 on Amazon. I kept thinking it was my fault that I wasn't healing fast enough, Sarah wrote in the comments section. She kept telling me I wasn't surrendering to the process and needed to buy more sessions. I spent my son's college fund trying to feel better. Then came Maria Santos from Denver, who'd paid $5,000 for the Divine Feminine Empowerment Retreat only to find herself in a rented house with 15 other women, eating catered sandwiches while Denise read from meditation books she'd downloaded online. She promised we'd each have individual sessions with her, Maria wrote. Instead, she showed up late every day and left early for spa treatments. We barely saw her for 3 hours total over the entire weekend. By Tuesday evening, my simple blog post had been shared over 10,000 times. Grief counseling organizations were reposting it with warnings about fraudulent practitioners. Real journalists were reaching out, wanting to investigate further. The hashtag Healing Heart scam was trending on Twitter. But the real moment I knew justice was coming happened Wednesday morning, when I got a call from Detective Raymond Torres with the Los Angeles Police Department's Economic Crimes Division. "Mrs. Washington," he said, his voice professional but kind, "we've been following the story about your daughter's charity. I want you to know that we've opened an investigation based on your documentation and several other complaints we've received since your story went public." Other complaints? I asked, though I wasn't really surprised. 14 additional victims have come forward in the past 48 hours. The amounts range from $500 to $15,000. Combined with your case, we're looking at wire fraud, mail fraud, and tax evasion charges that could carry significant prison time. Prison time. For my baby girl who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms, who'd cried when she stepped on ants as a child because she didn't want to hurt any living thing. "Mrs. Washington? Are you still there?" "Yes," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "What happens now?" "We'll need you to come in and make a formal statement. Bring all your documentation. We'll need the original records for evidence. And Mrs. Washington, you should know that the IRS Criminal Investigation Division is involved now too. This isn't just going away." After I hung up, I sat in Marcus's chair for a long time, looking at the framed photo on his desk. The 4 of us at Denise's college graduation, all smiles and proud hearts. She'd been studying psychology then, talking about how she wanted to help people heal from trauma. Somewhere along the way, helping people had turned into helping herself to their money. The next few days were a whirlwind. I flew to Los Angeles to meet with Detective Torres and federal investigators. I spent hours in sterile conference rooms, going through bank records and charity filings with people who nodded grimly and made notes in manila folders. They treated me with the kind of gentle respect reserved for crime victims, which I supposed I was. But I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was the catalyst that had brought down an entire network of spiritual scammers. The investigation revealed that Denise's operation was bigger than anyone had imagined. She wasn't working alone. She was part of a loose network of fake wellness gurus who shared client lists and referrals. When someone finished one of Denise's programs, they'd get steered toward a crystal healer in Sedona or a past life regression therapist in Santa Fe. The whole thing was designed to keep vulnerable people moving from one expensive fake treatment to another. The financial records were staggering. Over 3 years, Denise had taken in over $2 million through her various schemes. The Healing Hearts Foundation was just one piece of a much larger puzzle that included fake certifications, worthless online courses, and retreats that promised spiritual transformation, but delivered only Instagram photo opportunities. Meanwhile, the public exposure was having its own effect. Denise's social media accounts went quiet after the first day of comments from angry former clients. Her websites disappeared one by one. The Divine Feminine Empowerment Retreat was suddenly postponed indefinitely. Her online courses were no longer available for purchase. But the most satisfying moment came 2 weeks after my story went public, when I received a certified letter at my Atlanta home. Inside was a check for $200,000, along with a brief note on expensive stationery. "Mom, I'm sorry. This covers the principal amount you donated. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me. Denise." I stared at that check for a full 10 minutes. The money was there, all of it, drawn on a Bank of America account in Los Angeles. My daughter had liquidated something, maybe her house, maybe her business assets, maybe both, to pay me back. But forgiveness? That was going to take more than a check and a 3-sentence apology. I deposited the money, then did something Denise probably wasn't expecting. I donated $150,000 of it to legitimate grief counseling organizations across the country, places that provided real help to real people without charging them thousands of dollars for the privilege. I kept $50,000 for myself, just enough to take that trip to Savannah that Marcus and I had always planned. The irony wasn't lost on me. Denise's money, earned by exploiting grieving families, was now going to actually help grieving families heal. 3 weeks later, I got another call from Detective Torres. "Mrs. Washington, I wanted to give you an update. We arrested your daughter this morning at LAX. She was trying to board a flight to Costa Rica with a one-way ticket and $50,000 in cash, fleeing the country, like a common criminal, which I supposed she was. She's been charged with 14 counts of wire fraud, 8 counts of mail fraud, and multiple tax evasion charges. The federal prosecutor is also looking at RICO charges because of the network aspect. She's looking at potentially 20 to 30 years in federal prison. 20 to 30 years. My daughter, who was 39 years old, could be nearly 70 when she got out of prison. If she got out of prison, Mrs. Washington, I need to ask, the prosecutor wants to know if you'd be willing to testify if this goes to trial." I closed my eyes and thought about Marcus, about the man who'd taught our children that actions have consequences, that integrity isn't negotiable, that you can't build anything lasting on a foundation of lies. "Yes," I said. "I'll testify." But as it turned out, I didn't have to. 2 months later, Denise pled guilty to all charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. 12 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole after 8. Full restitution to all victims, plus fines and penalties that would ensure she'd never profit from her crimes. The day of her sentencing, I drove to the federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta. Not to see her. I wasn't ready for that yet, but to read the victim impact statement I'd written. I wanted the judge to understand not just the financial harm, but the deeper damage done when someone weaponizes love and grief for personal gain. "Your Honor," I said, standing at the podium in a courtroom that smelled like old wood and stale coffee, "my daughter didn't just steal money from me. She stole my husband's memory, my trust in family, and my faith in the goodness of people who claim to help others heal." I talked about the other victims, the women who'd been targeted at their most vulnerable moments. I talked about the real grief counselors and therapists who dedicated their lives to helping people heal, only to see their profession tarnished by scammers and con artists. And I talked about consequences. My husband used to say that you can't learn from mistakes if you don't face the music. My daughter needs to face the music, not just for what she did to me, but for all the families she hurt. Maybe 12 years will be enough time for her to remember the woman I raised her to be. The judge, a kind-faced woman about my age, nodded as I spoke. When it came time for sentencing, she was firm but fair. "Ms. Washington-Chun," she said, looking directly at Denise, who sat hunched at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit. "You systematically exploited people at their most vulnerable moments. You turned their pain into your profit, and you did it with a level of calculation and callousness that this court finds deeply disturbing. 12 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. You will make full restitution to all victims, and you are permanently barred from operating any charity or nonprofit organization." That was 6 months ago. Denise is currently serving her sentence at a federal facility in Alabama. She's written me 3 letters. Rambling things full of spiritual platitudes and requests for forgiveness that sound like the same fake enlightenment she used to sell to her clients. I haven't written back. Maybe someday I will, but not yet. Trust, once broken, needs time to heal properly. And unlike my daughter's fake healing programs, real healing can't be rushed or bought. Michael Jr. and Kimberly have been complicated. They're angry, embarrassed, caught between loyalty to their sister and horror at what she did. They've both offered to help me move past this and focus on family healing, which sounds suspiciously like they want me to pretend it never happened. But I'm not interested in pretending anymore. I'm not interested in being the family peacekeeper who smooths over problems and makes excuses for bad behavior. I'm 68 years old, and I've learned that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's enablement. These days I spend my time differently. I volunteer with a legitimate grief counseling center here in Atlanta, helping other widows navigate the practical and emotional challenges of loss. I've become something of an expert on charity fraud, speaking at conferences and workshops about how to spot fake nonprofits and spiritual scams. And I'm writing a book. Not about revenge or family drama, but about resilience. About how to rebuild your life when the people you trust most let you down. About the difference between forgiveness and accountability. Between being kind and being foolish. The title is When Love Becomes a Weapon. A Mother's Guide to Surviving Family Betrayal. My publisher thinks it's going to help a lot of people who've been through similar experiences. I think Marcus would be proud. Last week, I finally took that trip to Savannah. I rented a little cottage near the beach and spent a week walking on the sand, eating shrimp and grits, and reading books that had nothing to do with fraud or betrayal or family dysfunction. It was peaceful in a way I hadn't experienced since before Marcus died. On my last night there, I had dinner at a restaurant overlooking the water. The waitress was a young woman about Denise's age, working her way through nursing school. She reminded me of my daughter at that age, earnest, hardworking, full of dreams about helping people. "What made you want to be a nurse?" I asked her as she refilled my sweet tea. "My grandmother," she said with a smile. She spent her whole life taking care of other people. Raised 6 kids, took in foster children, volunteered at the hospital until she was 80. She always said that real healing happens when you show up with clean hands and an honest heart. Clean hands and an honest heart. That's what I'd tried to teach my children. That's what Marcus had modeled every day of his life. That's what real healing looks like. As I drove home to Atlanta the next morning, I thought about the difference between justice and revenge. Revenge would have been destroying Denise out of anger, tearing her down to make myself feel better. Justice was holding her accountable for her actions, protecting other people from being victimized, and ensuring that the consequences matched the crime. I'd gotten justice. And more importantly, I'd gotten something Denise's fake healing programs could never provide: real peace. My house feels different now. It's still too quiet sometimes, still full of memories that make me miss Marcus with an intensity that takes my breath away. But it's also mine again in a way it hasn't been since he died. I'm not the grieving widow being managed by her children anymore. I'm Dorothy Mae Washington, survivor and truth teller, grandmother and volunteer. Woman who learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to be anyone's victim. The roses in my garden are blooming again this spring, deeper red than ever. I like to think Marcus would approve of how I've tended them, and how I've tended to our family's legacy of integrity. Because in the end, that's what this was all about: not money or revenge or even justice, but ensuring that the values Marcus and I tried to instill in our children actually meant something. That love has boundaries, that trust must be earned, and that actions, all actions, have consequences. Denise will get out of prison someday. When she does, I hope she's learned something real about healing, about honesty, about what it means to help people without helping yourself to their wallets. Until then, I have a life to live and a story to tell. And for the first time since Marcus died, I'm not afraid of either one. Because Dorothy Mae Washington doesn't raise no fools. But she did raise herself up from being one. And that, honey, is the best kind of healing there is.